Not a great day for the Ohio State Buckeyes yesterday up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And after going to bed last night and waking up this morning and realizing, at least here in Northeast Ohio, that the sun actually didn't come up today, or if it did, you can't tell because it's gross outside. Where do the Buckeyes go from here? What's next? What chances do they actually legitimately have to make the college football playoff? And how does Ohio State try to figure out ways to change the result? Because for the third year in a row, not quite good enough in the game. We're going to get into all of it next on Buckeye Breakdown. We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All-Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. Well, hey, everybody. Happy Sunday, and welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. Alongside Anthony Moeglin, I'm Brendan Gulick, and it is not a great Sunday for Ohio State fans after yesterday's extremely disappointing, I might even say soul-crushing loss up in Ann Arbor, 30-24, in a game that statistically, Anthony, they pretty much won every category except the scoreboard. And at the end of the day, man, that's the only thing that actually matters. They did not outscore Michigan. And so now you sit here and you try to start over.
Pick up the pieces, right? You know, that's the unfortunate part. You get a night to sleep on it, and you wake up and you're like, dang, that actually did happen, you know. And it's like, so that's the frustrating reality of it. You know, I think it felt like they were so close. It felt like they won the football game, but not only did they not outscore Michigan, but the biggest category, the biggest stat category is turnovers. You turn it over just twice, and that was enough to kind of seal the deal there. So a frustrating day, but like you said, the sun kind of came up today, and it's time to trudge forward because although it may feel like the sky's falling, the season may not be totally over, as we saw from some of the games last night.
Let's start there, I guess, and then I'll go back to maybe a more controversial question here in a bit. But let's start there. I saw the All-State Playoff Predictor model on ESPN last night at about 11:20. And it said that in terms of, you know, ranking the top teams' greatest likelihood to make the playoffs in reverse order, it was Michigan, Georgia, Florida State, and Ohio State. The Buckeyes, according to ESPN's playoff prediction model, have a 54% chance of making the playoffs. That is slightly better than Oregon's 49% chance, which is slightly better than Washington's chances. Texas was next at 11%. And I guess I'm having a hard time believing this, but I suppose I can see why it would say so. Apparently, Alabama has an 8% chance to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
So I guess the question here is pretty straightforward. Do you think Ohio State is going to be in the college football playoff here this year?
I'd say there's more than a reasonable chance, you know, seeing that number at 54%. There's some stuff that obviously has to fall Ohio State's way. And I'll tell you what, you know, that all of that playoff predictor model was after most of the chaos that ensued last night ensued. Like if Alabama would have fallen to Auburn, which they probably should have, that finish was insane. And then even the finish in the Apple Cup out in Washington, that would have had significant impact on Ohio State's chances. But those two still go. Those two teams don't fall for an upset in their games. But Ohio State still has a chance. And it's like how you're kind of trying to map it out, and it's going to have to come down to the voters, you know, trying to put Ohio State in over some teams that, you know, potentially, maybe potentially a conference champion, a one-loss conference champion or something like that. But there's a chance.
I mean, a one-loss conference champion extremely likely won't get in this year.
Yeah.
Period. And that's just by virtue of having a 4-team playoff, which I've said for 10 years is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. We have 5 Power 5 conferences. Why do we have a 4-team playoff? It's stupid. It's just stupid on the surface. At its core level, it's dumb. And for everybody that said for 10 years, well, there's not really more than 4 teams that could actually win the playoff. I don't care. That's dumb.
Yeah.
Stupid. The fact that we are now moving to a model where if you win your conference championship, you get to go to the postseason, and that means something, and that the other best teams in the country that clearly could make a run at a title but were otherwise denied a chance to get there are going to get in the playoff. I love it. I realize it's going to take away some meaning of some of these rivalry week games, but I'm really glad we've got playoff expansion. Now, that said, I'm trying to understand that playoff prediction model. And so here's sort of what I've come up with. First of all, it didn't give Michigan a 100% chance of getting in. And I have a really hard time thinking that Michigan doesn't make the playoff. But I guess if they lose to Iowa, that their overall resume could potentially leave them on the outside. I just don't see that happening. Michigan's going to get in. Not to mention, they're going to beat Iowa by 25 or 30 points. Georgia, first of all, I think Georgia's going to beat Alabama. But if they don't, Georgia still has 4 really good wins on their schedule. And I think Georgia's going to have the best possible case for a one-loss team. But I think the reason that their chances are so high is because they're going to be the betting favorite against Alabama. Florida State is hard to wrap your arms around because they don't have their starting quarterback anymore, and they didn't look great yesterday, but they got it done, right? As frustrating as it is, and last year might be a good example of it, when the committee put TCU in and probably could have had a conversation amongst themselves that TCU was a good team that probably didn't belong in the playoff. They got hammered. Florida State, without Jordan Travis, I don't see him winning a playoff game, let alone getting to a championship game. But you can't penalize a team that is potentially undefeated just because they lost their starting quarterback. So if Florida State wins the ACC title game against a Louisville team that is really head scratching because they're good, but they're also like, how did that happen yesterday?
Yeah.
I don't want to give you no chance to jump in. So I'll
sorry. Yeah, no, for that Louisville team though, it's like, hey, they're going to be 11-1. I think they're 11-1 or 10-1. They have 1 loss. It's the Pitt. Pitt's one of the worst teams.
Louisville's lost twice, haven't they? Did they lose to Kentucky?
Yes, they did lose. They did end up losing. Yeah. So okay, so they're totally out of it, but they're a good team. Like there's no reason why they couldn't beat Florida State. So like obviously Louisville's not in it, but they are going to want to play spoiler to knock off Florida State.
Yeah, they beat Notre Dame earlier in the year.
Absolutely.
So that's why Florida State's got a really high probability of getting in. And then from there, it gets a little funky. In my opinion, the team that wins the Pac-12 should get a bid this year because the Pac-12 has been actually like really good. And folks that aren't watching football out on the West Coast haven't enjoyed or appreciated how good they've been this year. If Washington wins the Pac-12 title game against Oregon, they're undefeated and they're definitely going to go. If they lose to Oregon, where each team has 1 loss and it's to each other, Washington winning in the regular season, and in that case, Oregon winning in the playoff, Oregon right now is red hot and they look the part. And I could see where the committee would say, hey, 1 loss conference champion, but they look like one of the 4 best teams in the country and they should get in.
And then before we even get off the Pac-12, it's like, okay, the conversation then is a 1-loss Oregon, who's the Pac-12 champ, you would get in. But does a 1-loss Washington, that's when the 1-loss Washington, it's versus the 1-loss Ohio State, then that conversation's there too. Does 2 Pac-12 teams get in or do 2 Big Ten teams get in?
Well, so I think the only difference there is at least you had 2 teams that made it to their conference championship game.
True. So
we're going to learn a lot about how this committee feels about Ohio State's entire body of work on Tuesday when they bring out the rankings. I think it's really easy to become prisoner of the moment and say, you lost, you're done, no shot. And you automatically have to like jump over all these other teams in front of you, or you fall back a certain number of steps because you lost late in the year. And I don't know that it always works that way, because the committee has tried to say several times, like, no, we start clean every week. We look at every resume individually every single week, and we rank them the way we think they should be ranked, not just when you lost. It matters, your whole body of work. So in my opinion, this week, Georgia should be 1, Michigan should be 2. I guess you could flip them, but I like Georgia better than Michigan. I think Washington should be 3. I could certainly actually, by the way, hear a case for Washington being 1, but that's a different conversation. Florida State 4. I believe Ohio State and Oregon are 5 and 6. I could see an argument both ways. Who should be 5, who should be 6. Then Texas, then Alabama, in my opinion. Texas really hasn't beaten anybody. They've got 1 good win over Alabama.
Yep.
But 1 win shouldn't be enough to leapfrog a bunch of other really good 1-win teams. If you look at their schedule, they haven't played a great schedule.
Right.
And
they slipped up, obviously slipping up against Oklahoma hurts them, no question. But, because you're not undefeated anymore, but that's really the only other great opponent on their roster that they had a chance to beat.
And Oklahoma State's not that good. I know they're playing in the Big 12 title game, but it would have been better if Oklahoma had made the Big 12 title game, because Texas could have avenged that loss and put a good win on their resume. I don't think Texas is getting in the playoff, even though they won at Alabama. And to me, that's all the more reason why a 14 playoff is insane. Alabama has, if Texas has that little chance to get in, you're not putting Bama in the playoff with 1 loss and being a conference champion, and not putting Texas in the playoff. I can't even believe I'm saying this. If Alabama beats Georgia, I actually think there is a reasonable chance that Georgia still gets in the playoff and Bama doesn't. I think that's possible. As wild as that is.
That would be nuts. Yeah, that would be out of control, because how do you put Bama in and not put Texas in if that were the case?
It's a perfectly reasonable argument to say that. But if we're evaluating this thing on the entire body of work, to not put in Alabama if they win the SEC championship seems pretty outrageous. But I don't know how you don't put Georgia in the field, even if they lose that game. In my opinion, they've already done enough to get in.
Their resume is really strong with all of their wins, but that's it. You make a great point, because if Bama does go and beat Georgia, then it's like, hey, you got to put Texas in because Texas beat Alabama. So then it's Georgia, Bama, Texas, and it's wait a second.
I don't think that combination of teams is even possible. I don't believe that.
Yeah.
So let's circle back here. How does this impact Ohio State? First of all, Ohio State's wins over Notre Dame and Penn State are both top 10 wins. Obviously, the Notre Dame win came on the road. I said yesterday on our post-game show, and I said it last year when Ohio State lost to Michigan, I kind of have a hard time believing that the Buckeyes are going to go to the playoffs. But I do believe they're one of the 4 best teams in the country.
Bless you.
Excuse me. I do believe they're one of the 4 best teams in the country. And I think there is a way that might be more clear than I originally expected yesterday that gets the Buckeyes in. It would be really clear cut for me if Georgia beats Alabama, gives Alabama 2 losses. That is certainly possible. If Washington beats Oregon and gives Oregon 2 losses, Washington's undefeated, Washington's in, 2-loss Oregon's not going to the playoff. Michigan wins, they're in. Though that's 3 teams.
Yep.
If Florida State loses, I think Ohio State's 1-loss resume is stronger than Florida State's 1-loss resume.
That's the answer right there.
And you need Texas probably to lose the Big 12 title game, although I don't know for sure that would matter. Conference championships is a data point, but it's not the be-all, end-all data point. And that part of it, Tuesday is most impactful. Does Ohio State in the CFP ranking fall behind Texas? Because if they do, you probably can't leapfrog them unless Texas loses. So I think that scenario, Washington wins the Pac-12, Georgia wins the SEC, Texas loses the Big 12 title game, and obviously Michigan wins the Big 10, and Florida State loses the ACC title game to Louisville. In that scenario, I think you could make a really strong argument for Ohio State's one-loss resume to be the fourth best resume in the country and set up either a rematch with Georgia from last year or a rematch of the game. It's wild to think about this year.
That would be crazy. And that's not that far out of the realm too. And,
No.
Kind of reading between the lines, like that playoff predictor that we all saw yesterday, you seem to think that, hey, maybe there is that is kind of them telling you, hey, this is the way it's going to go. And
you're calling it a little better than a coin flip.
Yeah. I mean,
4%.
You come off that loss, and it was a very fun juxtaposition of my Twitter feed of being like, hey, the sky is falling, delete football out of my life, I hate everything, to, oh my gosh, there's a really good chance for us to still make the playoff and still have a chance to win the national title.
And I mean, in so many ways, man, this is deja vu from last year, because we were having these same thoughts and feelings a year ago. It just felt to me like there was a much messier picture this year with a lot of really good teams this year. And last year, I thought the waters were a bit murkier. I'm sorry, where the waters were less murky. It was a more clear path to get to the playoff. So, look, we'll see what happens. I think I personally think the Buckeyes are going to be left out.
Yeah, but
I see better today how it's more possible than not that they get in. So we'll see.
It's definitely a chance, and it's the cliche thing, right? The line from Dumb and Dumber. You say there's a chance, like there's a chance, and it's better than half, and it's a realistic chance. Exactly what you laid out there. If they come out on Tuesday and have Ohio State ahead of Texas, the writing's on the wall for all Ohio State fans to see. Here's the path to get into the playoff.
So who do you rank where on Tuesday? Let's slightly change this here. Just give me the top 8, because that's really all that kind of matters. Like from 9 down in last week's rankings, Missouri's not getting in.
Right. Yeah. No, I think you're right. So it's Georgia 1, Michigan 2. So I think there's your 1-2 there. Your number 3 is a mix between Washington and Florida State. So those are your top 4. And I agree with you. I got, in my opinion, it's Ohio State and it's Oregon, right? But that's a coin flip. It doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't much matter where they're at. It's going to depend on what happens next week. And then I have Texas at 7. And like, I think that's kind of where, the buck stops for me. It's like, where
I would say that it does matter between Ohio State and Oregon, because you need to be able to determine whether or not Oregon can jump from 6 to 4 if they beat Washington. If Oregon is already ahead of Ohio State, if they're 5 and they beat Washington in a Pac-12 championship game, it seems obvious that they would move up and that they're going to go to the playoff. But if they beat Washington, win the Pac-12 title, but they were ranked behind Ohio State the previous week, the committee is saying, hey, through 12 games, Ohio State's resume is better than Oregon's. And the debate will be, did a win over a team that they had previously lost to, those two things that maybe they negate each other a little bit. What else did Oregon do during the year that would stack up better than what Ohio State did during the year?
Yeah.
So if Oregon's 5 on Tuesday, I agree Oregon's going to go. If they're 6 on Tuesday and they beat Washington and the Buckeyes are 5, I still think they probably should go, but I don't know if it's quite as clear cut.
Wow, that would be something if they win the Pac-12 and avenge their loss to Washington and add that Washington win to their resume and don't get in. That would be a shocker to me. But you make a great point. It's like, they are telling you they're using the playoff rankings to tell you, hey, where everything's at, where they do stand. That would be something. I would be that. We'll see how it all shakes out, obviously, on Tuesday. But I would also add to the 8th team. I guess they play Friday night, but the 8th team in my ranking obviously is Alabama. And I think that Texas is in front of Alabama. The games have to mean something. And playing straight up and losing to Texas, although it is their solo loss on the year, I think that it has to put them below Texas. But then that goes to your point, though. Like, if they do beat Georgia, it's the same conversation we just had.
If they beat Georgia, is it possible that the SEC is left out of the playoff? That is a completely foreign concept.
Yeah.
But I think it's possible. I don't think it's likely, but I think it's possible.
And that win would also, too, have to add, it's such a sliding door. It's it's a sliding doors thing. Like, if they do beat Georgia, then that changes their whole resume, So where does that jump them? I don't know. That I'm glad I'm not on the committee, right? Like you said, the 4-team thing is crazy. But there are going to be some tough conversations, but there certainly is an avenue that Ohio State does get in that Final Four for sure.
Sorry, Dr. Detroit. Yeah, don't care. For the same reason that everybody would argue that Ohio State would just get in because they've got such a fan base and they'll just bring in the money. I don't believe that is part of it. And actually, as much as there are people that argue for that kind of stuff, I truly believe that this committee is trying to put in the 4 best teams.
Yeah.
In the order that they think they're ranked, and then the matchups are what they are. And if they believe that there are 4 resumes stronger than Georgia's, which I have a hard time believing to be the case, it's why the Georgia has such a strong chance of getting in. But I think it is extremely unlikely, but possible that the SEC is left out.
What, in your opinion, right? We're sitting here on Sunday afternoon. What do you think, right? What do you think's going to be the Final Four? Who do you think? What's your Final Four that you're thinking right now? I would take this to the bank.
Yeah, that's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
Because I expect Georgia to beat Alabama and get in. Yep. I expect Michigan to beat Iowa and get in. I think Florida State's going to lose to Louisville.
Yep.
And I think it's going to be a really good Pac-12 championship game. To me, Michael Penix is probably my favorite player outside of Ohio State to watch in the country. I think he's a stud, but I think Oregon's playing better football than Washington right now. And so I think the waters are going to get pretty controversial.
Do you think the result of that Pac-12 game will play a role? Like, do you think what if there's 2 scenarios? What if Oregon goes in and mollywops Washington? Or what if
it helps Ohio State
31-30?
Yeah. No, if it's a close game in the Pac-12, I think that's bad for Ohio State. Now, I kind of expect it to be a close game. But if it's a blowout, if Washington just lays an egg and Oregon runs away with them, I think the Ducks probably should get in.
Yeah,
I mean, look, I think Florida State is out with a loss. I don't think their 1-loss resume would be enough to get in. And I think a Pac-12 team deserves to go. So it becomes a question of a 1-loss Big 12 champion Texas, a 1-loss non-conference champion Ohio State, and a 1-loss non-conference champion Washington. Mm-hmm. Who gets the final spot? Washington has one excellent win against Oregon, and they have a pretty good strength of record because their league has been really strong. Yeah. Ohio State has 2 top 10 wins this year against Notre Dame and Penn State. Texas has 1 awesome win against Alabama, and that's what they're hanging their hat on. And I just don't know how the committee is going to choose. So I would say Ohio State's got a chance, but I don't love it.
There's definitely a chance. It was funny, like I said earlier, just as people realized, oh my gosh, there's still a chance the season's not over. And I think that's kind of what I came away with after yesterday. After the dust kind of settled around, it took me till about 8 or 9 p.m. to realize, oh, maybe this thing isn't all the way over.
All right. So what stood out to you when you watched this game back? Is there anything that, you have the snap, quick judgment, emotions of yesterday, those kind of fizzle out. You go back, you watch the game again. Did something else stand out to you that you missed in real time?
Yeah, I made a jump comment to you right before we started, but just the biggest thing that stood out to me was, and it goes back to the biggest key of the game that you had laid out before the game yesterday, was how important the interior defensive line needed to be, and just how important the Ohio State's defensive line needed to be, and how well they needed to play. And I said right before we started, man, we only had 2 sacks. It felt like a lot more. And when I rewatched it, JT and Jack Sawyer were like this close a number of different, not just once or twice, but a number of different times, from turning the edge and getting to JJ McCarthy, and at the very least sacking him. But you know how like those guys do, and especially when you get free defensive end runners, they're going for the football, and you never know how a momentum shifter, a big play like that would happen. And I'm telling you, man, there was 5, 6, 7 times where it's like one step away, from making a massive, massive play and changing the game. And, I thought the entire defensive line played great, but it was just like so close to changing the game totally.
I thought they were held a lot.
Yes, that's another thing too.
It's pretty irritating. I was a little more critical of Kyle's second interception, the game sealing pick.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little more critical in the heat of the moment yesterday than I probably should have been. Watching it back, I think he made the right read, and he hung in there knowing he was going to get rocked, and the throw wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
But I don't know that my initial criticism was totally fair on, hey man, check it down, live to see another down, throw it at somebody's feet. Just, you can't take a sack in that situation, but just kill the play.
Yeah.
Because that happened so fast, and it was a straight line of attack from linebacker to quarterback. I was probably a little more frustrated in real time than I should have been on that.
Yeah, no question. And there's a still shot going around of 2 checkdowns that were sitting kind of open. That one's tough, man, because it's like at that point in the game, you hear it a bunch. We're going to hear it this afternoon, this evening, watching pro football. Like, you got to give your best players a chance, and especially when the game is in the balance, got to give your guys a chance. And standing in there and trying to get one to Marvin. It's going to go down, as one of those a really tough play, obviously, because it ended as an interception. But anytime you're trying to give 18 a chance, I'm okay with it. It was just a tough end to that game, and a game that, like I said last night, and I'll stand on this, like, thought after the first quarter and after the first couple of drives, I thought Kyle played well. I truly thought he did. Obviously, I'm in the minority there, but it was an unfortunate way for him to end that game.
Ryan Day got conservative yesterday in some moments that surprised me. He's had enough big games, enough big moments now over the last few years. I don't know that we saw, I'm just going to call him Georgia Ryan Day. I don't know that we saw him in that situation yesterday. As I tried to take a step back and consider the end of the first half decision process, you're either choosing, hey, we're going to kick a field goal, we're going to try to get the points, or you're choosing, now I want to be aggressive and see if we can get either a shorter field goal or try to score a touchdown here, especially knowing that, Michigan deferred and they were going to get the football to start the second half. Once Ryan Day made the decision, I want to run the clock all the way down once he made the decision that he was going to kick a field goal and try to get points on the drive, salvage something from it, from that point forward, I don't have any issue with him running the clock down and making it the final play of the half. The controversy is the decision in the first place. Yeah. It's why choose on a drive where you had already connected on a couple of good plays on 4th and 2 with a timeout. Why not choose as the coach that build his offensive philosophy as a coach under Urban Meyer as the super aggressive guy? We're going for your throat. Why in some big games has that shifted a little bit?
That exact scenario and that play, and you think about it, man, there's and I kind of thought about this too and talked with some friends last night. It's okay, he did say he kind of got a little smart with one of the guys last night in the post-game press conference. Yeah, it's 4th down. If we don't get it, we don't get it, and we turn the ball over. But I think the point is that you can decide that right there. The situation is there was about 20 seconds left. You had one timeout. If you burn that timeout right there, then you can talk about it and be like, hey, if we get this, the clock stops and you have plenty of time to go up and kill it and now have a shorter kick, which 52 yards is the kind of the edge of a lot of pro kickers, let alone a college guy.
And so that's a part of it. I don't want to cut you off here, but Jaden Fielding had never made a field goal that long in his collegiate career.
Right.
And kindly, Ohio State special teams have been a liability.
Yeah.
So trusting that situation just felt more risky to me than putting Marvin Harrison Jr. and Cade Stover and Emeka Egbuka and Travion Henderson on the field on a 4th and 2.
That's
you
it.
should feel like you can go pick up 2 yards.
For the same reason I said in the big moments, you got to go to your big time players. That's you choosing your kicker over those guys you just said. And that's and especially too, we may get into this here in a moment, but he understands kind of the scope of everything and understands what that game meant yesterday. And with the history, his resume to this point, if I was expecting him to coach with his hair on fire, I thought it was going to be not irresponsible, but any chance there was a time to go for it, I felt like they were going to go for it. Any opportunity to shake the game up and make it different and really try to push the tempo and really push it. I thought he was going to take that advantage, and he never did. And that was it's a good point that you bring up. He did kind of coach conservative in a game where, frankly, he couldn't afford to be conservative.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get it. Maybe they had those conversations. I mean, there's probably a lot of things that go on the sideline and in headsets that nobody's ever going to know, right? Maybe they talked about, should we go for it or should we kick? And for whatever reason, Ryan Day valued enough on a drive that, if I remember correctly, that drive started back pretty deep in their own territory.
Yep.
So maybe he felt like, we've gone a long way here. Coming away with nothing would suck. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try to kick a field goal. And I understand that. I just don't know that it was the right call.
Yeah.
But it's so easy to armchair quarterback it.
Well,
and
I was just about to say, if hindsight's 2020, if he would have buried that 52-yarder, we'd have been like, what a great call.
Yeah. Yeah. So this feels like a natural transition to the Ryan Day topic here. I am pleasantly surprised that I've seen a lot of people on social media defending him, because you're going to see a ton of ridiculous comments from people that would never say this to Ryan Day's face or would never say it to Ohio State in person, that he sucks or he needs to be canned or whatever, so on and so forth. Ohio State's program is extremely healthy. They are, without a sliver of a doubt, one of the 5 most competitive programs in the country. Recruiting is continuing to go really well. The issues they had defensively the last 2 years seem to be gone. Mm-hmm. And for people that are saying, well, you couldn't get off the field defensively yesterday against Michigan and you gave up 30 points. You gave up 30 points yesterday because of an interception that put Michigan on the 7-yard line, and on, let's call it a controversial, and just leave it at that, a controversial touchdown that may have been an interception. So if you take those two things out of the equation for a minute, you had a defense that played pretty darn well. That's 16 points with a touchdown and 3 field goals. You held the number 3 ranked team in the country to 338 yards of total offense and 3 for 12 on third downs and no explosives. I think the defense played well enough to win yesterday. Ultimately, Michigan was better, right? They won the game. They won. There's no excuse. They won. Ohio State didn't make enough plays, and it's probably more about quarterback play yesterday than it's ever been. So this is not an excuse, station here. If Ohio State moves on from Ryan Day, they are completely missing the picture. And let me be very clear about this. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. Ryan Day is the right guy to coach at Ohio State. He's made the adjustments that he needed. He has recruiting in the right spot. The NIL money is starting to get into a better place now. He has shown consistently an ability to develop talent at the highest levels. He consistently has his team either in the CFP or right on the brink of it, right? 3 of the last 4 years you've been in the playoff, and the 1 year you didn't, you won the Rose Bowl. And we're about to move into a stage where there are now 12 teams making the playoff, where Ohio State is basically going to be an annual postseason team moving forward. There is no reason to pull the plug and say, that guy ain't it. We need to hit the reset button. It's not going to happen. It shouldn't happen.
And okay, let's play a hypothetical. If it does happen, where do you go? Who do you bring in that's better? What are the options there? I'm seeing people are messing around with Photoshop, and it's Dion, it's Dan Lanning in Oregon, it's all these guys, and you're like, is that better? Is that better than what you have right now? Like, if you just figure out this one game and figure out how to, and yes, he has to figure out how to beat Michigan, and this can't continue to happen, but it's like, holy cow, there's a chance, like we just talked about, that they may still have an opportunity to compete for a national title. Is there places for them to get better? Yes. But this team is, like you said, this program's as healthy as it's ever been. And then, just because we're coming up short, a couple times late in the year, it's like, do you really make the decision based off of that?
And I don't think this will ever happen. But I almost wonder if Ohio State might choose to back down a little bit of the rhetoric. Because I think there is an element of they're creating their own problem here. When you are as vocal as they are about this game's the only thing that matters, we work at 365, you have practice periods for it all the time, you live the rivalry constantly, and if you don't beat Michigan, that's unacceptable. When you swirl in the comments from, the keyboard warriors all over the country, it can make it seem like this tsunami of hate, of vitriol when you lose this game. And I don't know that Ohio State will ever say that out loud, because this rivalry means so much to so many people, and you can't lose it. You can't lose it. But if Ryan Day and his staff stop putting forth with such force the expectations that are at every other school in America unattainably high, maybe that backs a little bit of the pressure off and allows people to see that, no, actually, you got it pretty good. Because I guarantee you, if Ohio State fired Ryan Day, he'd be unemployed for a week, and he'd be a legit head coach at another Power 5 school right now. In fact, Michigan fans won't even admit this because they've won 3 years in a row. I guarantee you there is a contingent of Michigan fans that would rather have Ryan Day than Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Oh yeah, and I think a week is generous. He would be unemployed for a day. Honestly, honest to God. I mean, he's one of the best coaches in all of football. My thing is, and it's like, where is the upgrade? Where do you go to upgrade from from Ryan Day. They just have to win this game. How they do it, I don't know. If I did know, I would be on the sidelines coaching for Ohio State, but I don't. So it's like, where do you go from here? For this team, and maybe that is it. Because you put so much pressure onto not even 24 hours, Brennan. You put so much pressure onto 60 minutes. You put an entire season, an entire offseason, and retire recruiting. You put an entire year's worth of preparation on the 60 minutes. And if you don't show up, and if you misread a slant and you throw a pick, everything crumbles. And you're like, oh my gosh. It's like, where's the balance? Because like you said, they have to win that game, but what's the best way to approach it in the future?
Yeah. I think Ohio State's roster is built to beat SEC teams. Mm-hmm. And I think Michigan's roster right now is built to beat Big Ten teams.
Yep.
And I felt that way for the last couple of years. And it's part of the reason why Ohio State looks so good against Georgia. They had the guys that could go beat Georgia. And they were a bad targeting call that was overturned to not targeting, and a missed field goal as time expired away from doing that.
Yep.
I don't know, man. I hear the fans that say Ryan Day's 40-0 against the Big Ten, not named Michigan, and he's 1-3 the last 5 years because you had one game that wasn't played. He's 1-3 against Michigan. I hear you, and I hear all the people that say we play 11 games to warm up for Michigan because that's the only game we care about. I hear you. I just think it's like I am trying to be really respectful as someone who grew up in the state of Ohio and loves this rivalry, loves this team. I'm so lucky that I get to cover Ohio State and that I think I have the respect of my peers and the team and the school's communications department. I love Ohio State. I want them to win. I try to be objective when things don't go well. And I just think that we all need like a little tiny bit of a reality check here, that putting absolutely everything into one game is really risky. And for a long time, man, life was pretty good because it felt like you could never lose. And I don't know how Michigan fans did that for 2 decades. Maybe they got to the point where it was like, yeah, we don't care anymore because we can't win. And so there's this apathy that creeps in. I don't want to get to that point.
But also, too, how will this change moving forward? Let's say that next year or the next 3 years, they start playing Michigan in week 6, okay? Where it is, you can have this crazy buildup, and then whatever happens in the game happens. And then after that, it's like, okay, then you turn your attention to making the playoff, because then you're in a situation where, all right, if you win, you're in great shape, but if you lose, you can still make the playoff. I feel like everything just gets so boiled to the top because after the game, we're talking playoff, and now you're thinking, it's just so much happens right at the end of the season. It's like, oh my gosh, so much just rides on this game. Just how can they just get over this hump?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people that want to have the conversation of would you rather win a national championship, or are you okay with winning a national championship if you lose to Michigan, or if you beat Michigan but lose a national championship, does that season still sit with you? Okay. And I mean, ultimately you're trying to win every game you play. Mm-hmm. I just feel like in this era where it's changed because Michigan, this rivalry was set up to basically prevent you from achieving your national championship goals. You want to be the best in the country. You want to win and be the last team standing, right? Mm-hmm. It used to be the case where Michigan could block that from Ohio State. And even before the national title stuff, going back to just like wanting to go play in the Rose Bowl. If you didn't beat Michigan, you probably weren't going to Pasadena, right? Mm-hmm. We're at a point now in the game, and I mean like college football in general, where that roadblock doesn't exist anymore because we're talking about playoff expansion and a Big Ten conference that has teams in Seattle and Eugene and Los Angeles and Newark and Chicago and everywhere in between. right? It's like the landscape has changed so drastically that you always want to win your rivalry game. And like we were going to have this kind of conversation today, regardless of the outcome yesterday, because yesterday it was the last day of the Big Ten as you know it.
Yeah,
it was.
Yep.
We closed a chapter on some of the pageantry and history and tradition of college football yesterday. And I'm not saying that it's going to suck going forward, but it's
different.
Vastly different than it has been for a while. So, yeah, look, I think there always has to be an emphasis on winning your rivalry game, but defining success based on whether or not you beat Michigan when you're going to get in the playoff every year. Because if Ohio State's not one of the top 12 teams in the country, you fire the coach, right?
Yeah.
Those resources, all of the stuff that goes into making a program great. If Ohio State ever fails to make the playoffs, we're having a different conversation around a coach. But somebody who's 56-7 and constantly has one of the top couple recruiting classes in the country. And by the way, yesterday, it's not like he got embarrassed by Michigan.
Oh,
come on, man. Pump the brakes on the Fire Ryan Day talk.
It's nonsense in my opinion, but you know, that's the world we live in nowadays, right? Everyone's got their take off.
One last topic and we'll wrap for today. It was a question asked early on. Todd jumped in and asked it, and I want to make sure we address this because I think there were some people that were wondering about this yesterday. TreVeyon Henderson versus Chip Trayanum, the usage rate between the two. Ohio State never had a long run yesterday. You know, they barely had a run that was 10 yards or more. And Trey Henderson's longest carry of the day was 8 yards. I think the answer to Todd's question around why the decision to have Trey run as many times as he did compared to Chip is because Ryan Day is obsessed, completely obsessed, infatuated, in love with TreVeyon Henderson's home run hitting capability.
Yes.
His ability to turn a short gain into a touchdown like that. And he doesn't want to take that speed off the field, but he wants to reward Chip for the incredible work rate and the physicality that he runs the football with. I was more frustrated by the constant decision to run Henderson between the tackles where he's never been effective for 3 years. If you're going to run those kinds of plays, you got to have Chip in the game for that. Maybe one or two with TreVeyon, but not as many as he had.
No, you hit the nail right on the head. You know, TreVeyon Henderson, the difference that he brings to the team, to the field, is that when he gets through the hole, he can turn a 5-yard gain into a 50-yarder, whereas Chip is going to turn that 5-yard gain into a 10-yarder and move the sticks. I actually felt like when they came out in the second half and used Chip Trayanum, I was like, this is perfect. Have a little 1-2 punch. Give a couple carries to TreVeyon, give a couple carries to Chip, and use them together in tandem, and just use them the right way. Like you said, they weren't just because TreVeyon's in the game doesn't mean he's going to blow one off. Like, you need to use him the right way. Get him in the pass game, which they tried to, but running him in between the tackles isn't where he was meant to be. And I thought that was where Chip was doing a good job at being that change up. And I agree with you. Didn't really use them the correct way. I appreciated him using both of them, but not in the way that he did.
Sunday after the Michigan-Ohio State game on a loss is not a lot of fun.
Add the cold and rainy weather to it. It's just like,
this is it's kind of miserable.
Yeah.
Kind of miserable. And I think a lot of people are feeling that way today. There's plenty of Michigan fans in the comments. I'm glad you're here. I hope you come often. Yeah. Thanks for seriously. I don't mind having Michigan people in here. Like, that's all good. Talk a little smack, have some fun, keep it clean, but that's
what it's about. And too, that's part of the great portion of this rivalry being so great and both teams being really good is that this stuff can happen.
Yep. And by the way, it's part of what we're losing as college football turns. I'm glad that this rivalry is so strong because I think a good chunk of that will last for a while. It's healthy. The rivalry is finally healthy. For a long time, it wasn't healthy. If you have one team basically beating the crap out of the other team year after year after year after year after year, the rivalry loses some of its lust. And as Ohio State fans now, it hurts. It really hurts. You hate losing that game. We got to live with this thing for another 364 days, and actually a little bit longer because I think it's November 30th next year is the the new iteration of the game. So the rivalry's healthy and it's in a good place, and I think there's still a chance Ohio State can make the playoff. We talked about that if you joined us late. Talked about that off the top of the show. ESPN's playoff predictor says it's a 54% chance and that they currently have the 4th best odds to make the playoffs. Personally, I find that a little bit hard to believe, but I'm ultimately also grateful for the fact that Penn State had a good year and that win counts and is a big win. And that Notre Dame kept it together and figured it out because maybe they weren't terrific this year, but it was a top 10 win on the road. And that obviously mattered to the committee.
Absolutely.
So we'll see how it all shakes out. In the meantime, we got all the latest news and info on the team over on BuckeyesNow.com. And we got plenty more video coverage coming for you here over the next week, even without Ohio State playing. There's going to be a lot to talk about. And certainly we'll try our best to figure out, not only continue to figure out what went wrong on Saturday, but try to give you a little bit of a roadmap of how this thing can get fixed moving forward, with all fingers crossed that there's still meaningful football ahead for Ohio State and not a berth in a bowl game that won't count much for more than just development. All right, for Anthony Moeglin, I'm Brendan Gulick. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I know the 1 o'clock games have already finished. If you're a Buckeye fan who's also a Bengals fan, tough day. Looks like Cincinnati lost to Pittsburgh. If you're a Buckeye fan who's also a Browns fan, you're probably settling in and hoping that the Denver Broncos don't spoil the rest of your weekend. So we will check in with you again real soon here on Buckeyes Now, and certainly appreciate you joining us here throughout the afternoon.